just gonna make my hair look rare, so I don't know. Maybe I'm kidding. I don't know. Okay, I actually look happy. That's all.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you. But it looks like there's only one.
Dim for anybody in this room, for mood lighting?
Wow, it's very moody.
You know, I mean, depending on how many people, I could sit right here, but I just didn't want to.
It's quite intimate and
Let's see.
it
Sit
feels
wherever
like
you're
we're gathered in
comfortable.
a
This
candlelit.
is perfect. Thank
might
you.
be a streaming event than a.
Well, now that I'm thinking of it, we'll get the recording.
I mean, this whole thing
Okay, and I'll get up while you do that.
Oh, sure, your choice.
No, please don't.
Checking. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm not sure if I'm in frame in Zoom, but hello, people online. Hello, people in the space. I'm going to stand up here for a few moments while everyone gets settled. Thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you so much. It's so great to see this group here. I'm really excited for this talk. First, I will introduce myself and the space that we're in. My name is Jillian. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the librarian here at Center for Book Arts. The space we are in is Center for Book Arts. We were founded 50 years ago by bookbinder Richard Minsky to be a space where the book arts could be brought to the wider world. And we still do that today with exhibitions, artist and residency programs, research, community building, providing studio space, workshops, and more. And also talks like this one. This talk is Artist Books for Stitchcraft, Threading Reproductive Justice, Resilience, and Change with Iviva Olenick. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
I was just thinking that was pronounced so much better than anyone in the family has managed to do. Yeah, we have another family member who can vouch for that.
I say old. But Olenick is.
That's good. That was
Great.
great.
Probably you think that.
Okay. Thank you. Iviva Olenick is a Brooklyn-based artist developing textiles from seed to fiber and dye and using textiles as texts. Her work has been exhibited all over the United States, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Museum of Design, Atlanta, the Hunterdon Museum, New Jersey, Sugar Hill Children's Museum of Art and Storytelling, New York City, the Center for Book Arts, New York City, the Old Stone House, Brooklyn, and White House Museum in Brooklyn. Olenick is a faculty member of SVA's MFA Art Practice program where she teaches fibers. In addition, she gives artist talks and designs intensive textile-based workshops for museums and universities. Thanks again, everybody, for coming, and I'll pass the mic to Iviva.
Thank you, Jillian. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm Iviva. Thanks for coming. Okay, so what is Stitchcraft? Some of you have participated in it or know about it because you've been kind of following along. It's an interdisciplinary project that was a response to the rumors that were circulating before the Dobbs decision about the Supreme Court's interest in reevaluating Roe versus Wade. So before it happens, I think we were all on pins and needles and we kind of like that sinking feeling in the gut, we kind of knew. And I talked with female friends or people with wombs, as I'm sometimes calling us, about what do we do? How can we possibly advocate for ourselves? What are the answers? And one of the overarching questions I asked myself was, well, medical abortion is not the only way that people have managed births or unwanted pregnancies throughout time. Plant-based care has been around for hundreds of years. Is it practical and efficacious in the 21st century that we could revive some of those practices? And if so, where do I find information about a plant-based abortion? And even before we get to plant-based abortion, what about managing menstrual cramps, encouraging lactation, managing menstrual cycles that are out of sync? So I decided to study the herbs, but also I wasn't just interested in the herbs, I was interested in the idea of herbalism as a cultural practice where women secretly shared information. So the oral transmission of cultural knowledge and tradition. And I wanted to revive that as well, and did that through craft circles, embroidery circles, both virtually and in person. So on the right is one of the in-person craft circles. I think two friends in the audience were at this event at Old Stone House in Washington Park. That was last June. I'm also growing health and dye plants or health and textile plants. I've been experimenting with textile plants since 2017 when I read about indigo's colonial history in the South and decided I wanted to try growing it here to make the labor more visible and to sort of pay tribute to the cultural traditions that were lost and the lack of acknowledgement of specialized enslavement labor. In that process, I learned about cotton root bark, which was used to induce menstruation. And as a result of learning about that, I thought, well, there's a lot more to these plants that I'm already growing. So what other plants should I be adding to my gardens? Calendula is one of the plants that I started growing in the last 2 years. It has a variety of uses. It's also, some of the petals have been pounded into this book, which we'll take a look at later. So artist books for Stitchcraft. Stitchcraft has been going on since 2022. The artist books I started in about a year ago. They illustrate plants and describe their reproductive and other health histories and potential uses today. Consider my ancestral links to medicinal plants that are still being used. And I'll talk about that more later on. Some of it's speculative. Embed the physical plants within books through monoprinting and dyeing. Share plants' Latin and colloquial names as a way of thinking about the intersections of different cultural traditions with the same or similar plants. And the books are made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, and through fiscal sponsorship with NYFA, New York Foundation for the Arts. So this talk is the culmination of the NISCA grant, basically. But I don't consider this the end of the project. I consider it the beginning. Okay, so I think I mentioned a lot of this. I've been growing plants since 2017. When I decided to think about growing more health plants specific to women's health, I consulted a few different herbalists. Danielle Moore is one of them. And there's a place in Brooklyn called Sacred Vibes Apothecary. Karen Rose is the founder, and she has a cult following. And this is one of her books. I did take a workshop with Sacred Vibes and also had an individual consultancy. We didn't really focus on, interestingly, we focused more on me and my health, but there were obviously intersections with reproductive health within that. And this book looks at health from a very holistic perspective, and this will be available for folks to check out later on. This is another book that was really influential, Ashkenazi Herbalism. It's the only printed material on Ashkenazi herbal traditions, and it focuses on Pale of Settlement, which was primarily a large swath of Russia. And as far as I know, I have 2 great-grandmothers from Minsk, which was technically part of Russia. And our family basically, in theory, is all from that area. So as I was working on this book, I kept imagining that my great-grandparents were practicing some of these herbal remedies. I don't have any way of finding that out, but I believe that it's partly why I'm so interested in it. Okay. So one of the things we did to create public access to some of what I was studying was plant a reproductive health garden at Old Stone House in Washington Park in 2023. We had Brooklyn Arts Council support. I did this with help from one of the herbalists, Danielle, and the director of gardens, Sam Lewis. 3 of the plants that are still thriving are Actaea racemosa or black cohosh. I think people have heard of blue cohosh probably more frequently. Black cohosh also has a lot of reproductive health activity, let's say. Vitex agnes castus or chase tree, and Verbena hostata, which has a lot of names. Blue vervain, swamp vervain, verbena, blue verbena. The black cohosh and the blue vervain are natives, and I don't know that they're specifically pollinator plants, but they definitely attract bees. That's something I noticed. The vitex I found out later is labeled as a problematic plant because it can quote unquote escape cultivation. So if I'd known that, I wouldn't have selected it. It has not posed a problem. I'm just mentioning it in case anyone's like thinking, oh, maybe I want to plant some things. Okay, this is a close-up of the verbena. Something to mention about those flowers, how it looks like they kind of creep up or creep down. It's a bitter herb, and bitter herbs are typically downward moving. And Danielle tells a story about how it was like the gateway herb for her. She tried a little bit of it and she had this headache, and the headache just lifted. It literally just moved. She felt it physically moving up. And looking at the way the flower is formed, I feel like it kind of shows you what the plant does, if that makes any sense. So with things that are downward moving, it also would increase menstrual flow or encourage menstrual flow and potentially lactation. On the right is a close-up of the flowers from the chase tree or the Vitex agnus castus. And in the center are prints made from those plants. I put the flower down, sandwiched it in between fabric, and took a jewelry hammer and just hit it. Yeah. Okay. So this is a little bit more about the plants. Black cohosh is considered a hormonal regulator. Use it for a brooding individual with a stagnant menstrual flow. So brooding, I mean, that's open to interpretation, but this is again from Danielle. Chase tree helps re-regulate hormones after pregnancy or after you're coming off the pill. So the pituitary gland, which is the central gland right here that regulates hormones, can get out of sync, and it works with the pituitary gland to regulate progesterone. So apparently it can show evidence of working within 10 days, but in general, herbs take time. It's like a 3-month process at least, I would say. Blue vervain can alleviate TMJ, neck tension, and headaches. And it's, as I mentioned, powerful and bitter, which means it's downward moving. It tends to have an impact on the liver, is good for relieving tension. It's considered a nervine. It works to calm the nervous system. So that was a lot of language that I think maybe clues us in a little bit about herbs in general, if we're not familiar with the vocabulary around how they work. Are there any questions so far about anything? Okay. So I found this group on Instagram, holistic.abortions, and they really do publish information about holistic abortions. Through them, I found this article that was a recent, I think a 2022 clinical trial of several different plant-based abortions. And what I learned from the article is that plant abortions are most likely to be effective if taken in the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. So if we think about some of the restrictive abortion laws, they actually have a similar trajectory of if it's in the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, and it's the same issue of, do we know at that point that we're pregnant, right? Some people might, some not. The herbs have to be taken over a number of days, and there's multiple herbs at the same time, titrated differently and ingested differently. It might be a tincture, which is something that's mixed with alcohol that you take. You might like put droplets of it on your tongue. It might be a tea or a decoction, which is like an extra strong tea. And these are some of the herbs, which we have at home, some of us, right? Parsley, cottonroot bark, we probably don't have. Black cohosh, mugwort. Has anyone been to Governor's Island? Mugwort is overrunning the island. Every summer, the past few years, the island has been renting sheep to graze on the mugwort to get rid of it. So it's out there. You can get access to it. Easy to find. I've seen it in Prospect Park. It is invasive. And then ginger. But it isn't as simple as like boil some ginger tea and you're done. It has to be spaced out a certain way, repeated, etc. And we don't need to get into the details of all of that, but I just am sharing holistic.abortions if anyone's interested. They have workshops. They're trying to put knowledge back into the sort of common contemporary lexicon. so that we don't have to dig through a ton of ancient history. It becomes more colloquial, more current, more known, and less rarefied and less hidden. Yes.
So, question, has it been scientifically studied?
Well, this
Herbal abortion?
is a scientific study. This is a clinical trial, so to speak. So yes, it has been.
Double-blind.
Well, yeah, I don't think you can, how do you do a placebo in an abortion
Yeah.
trial? I'm not
Yeah,
sure
I'm
how we do that.
Oh, it's like,
It is,
oh, I'm
There,
just
they
curious.
are, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's can be done the way you would do a different type of medication, meaning like an allergy pill or, relieving symptoms is one thing. With abortion, if it's an incomplete abortion, you have to go get it taken care of. You
Right,
can't
right.
just. The herbs are strong and they are impacting a fetus, right?
Right.
So if you don't fully abort, there's going to be repercussions for the fetus if you continue to carry. So this isn't something that you can kind of like test it. Someone who wants an abortion is not going to ask for a placebo.
Yeah.
I think there are some other considerations in this specific case.
Well, it's like, I
How do you test
trust the
it?
safe. I mean, oh, yeah, what are the statistics that it would work?
The article shares more
Yeah.
about that because it does give statistics. I'm not quoting them. I can click on the link if you want to see the article.
Yeah,
I can, yeah,
yeah.
I can forward it. So you can read it, because I don't know if I'm doing it justice or really able to answer the question effectively. I'm just sort of like thinking aloud about, okay, so we talked about what these words mean already. I showed you these two books that I love, I recommend them. And one of the artists who is associated with the center, Elizabeth Castaldo, made a really beautiful screen printed artist book, The Witch's Body, where it has pages showing different plants that have abortion related or reproductive health related histories. So at this point, rather than focusing, let's go through these slides quickly because I have this actual book and it's wearable and I want to show this part and ask for a volunteer to help turn the pages because I think that's gonna share another aspect of what I'm thinking about with the books and how they relate to the body of the person making them and how they relate to how it feels to be in a female body. Knowing that our maternal and infant mortality rates have risen as a result of recent abortion policy changes. So this is herbal abortion and other folk remedies, herbs to make you bleed. And it digests some of what was in that article, basically. It lays it out in a short form. A menagogue promotes bleeding. A menagogue is often used as a coded term for plant-based abortion, but you need more than that type of plant. You need something that's going to encourage uterine contractions, block progesterone, and soften the cervix. So those are the four things you need. So it actually is complicated. That's why you're taking the multiple herbs. It isn't as simple as like take one of these and done, like have ginger tea go to bed. It's best taken in the first 6 weeks, and it has 4 parts, which we just looked at. This mentions verbena hastata, which is an emmenagogue to induce menses, and a galactagogue to encourage lactation. Other emmenagogues, black cohosh, cottonroot bark, and ginger. So again, I threw in some Yiddish because I wanted to like somehow get this book in there. So that it's mished means like mixed up. That's because I was mixing different plants that weren't necessarily purely the ones that I'm mentioning. Because I bet that other plants also work in this area and I just don't know that. So on the bottom is red amaranth leaf, which has a bunch of other cultural and food and health related implications. And that's the cover. So let's actually pause. Oh, I have to put this down. So this is the book. And I was thinking of it as sort of a shield. because the idea was, well, how do we protect ourselves, right? And I mean, originally it was supposed to land here, but it landing around my uterus actually kind of makes more sense, honestly. And it does, try to reverse it. It does flip where, imagine your sandwich board. It flips around like that. Oh, I deliberately made this drippy because I was talking about herbs that make you bleed. So, I mean, hey, I didn't use menstrual blood, which artists have been known to do. That could really put us over the edge on this project. And then there's one last page. So that's this book. Also, having it on your back is like a burden that you carry. And I think all of that metaphor is important to this piece. But I think it's important to this conversation that none of us should be burdened with going through any of this alone. And none of us should be struggling to have access to this information if we want it, if this is our choice of how to manage our health. Thanks for watching that. Okay, so this is an accordion book that I don't happen to physically have with me. I mentioned that plants that work on reproductive organs work on other parts of the body. I have what I call, with a little bit of affection, menopause skin. So I'm often referencing skin related applications of some of these plants, like the calendula is known to soothe skin, and it's supposed to both soothe PMS and eczema, which seems like kind of a cool dual acting plant. So that's in there and in this book too. Yeah. Calendula and hibiscus for menstrual cramps and PMS. Yeah. Okay, so Stitchcraft is about reproductive health, but it's looks a little broader at plants. And one of the plants I've worked with for a long time is Isatis tinctoria, or woad. It's a Eurasian indigo, and I've speculated that it might be a plant my ancestors would have had access to, because Russia is close to China. Frankly, it's close to Asia. It seems like it was in that general region. I've grown the plant since 2018, and I have been dyeing yarn and fabric and printing leaves with it. So this book here has a bunch of different dye methods. A lot of this was ink that was actually painted onto silk and cotton. There is a little pomegranate peel in here. Sometimes what happens is I work backwards, where I'm teaching a dyeing class. I pick up some material that I know, like a plant that I know has dye capacity, and then I look it up from an herbalism perspective. And that's when I realize, oh, it does all these other things too. That makes sense. It's like both sides of looking at the plant. And we can look at that later. That's what woad looks like in its first year. It's in the cabbage family. It smells like cabbage. It grows really low to the ground. It's used in Chinese medicine. It has very high antioxidants, to the extent that it's even been trialed in cancer clinical trials for treating certain types of cancer. This is it in year 2. It goes to seed, it flowers, makes these yellow flowers, which I think are edible. It is an edible plant. And those are the seeds, which themselves, if you boil them, you get like a lavender dye. It's a biannual plant. It's illegal in some states because it's considered invasive. We haven't really had an issue with it spreading too much. It spreads a little, but we just uproot it. This book speculates on my great grandma Sonia, whom I know was immigrated from Russia, and wondered if she grew indigo and other plants, and if she brought seeds with her when she came here. I'll give everyone a second in case you want to read the text. Just give me a thumbs up. So Sonia is not in this story, but another artwork. Sonia escaped from Russia to England, and the story that my mom has told me is that she worked in a cigarette factory where the boss was kind of a lech, and she led the women in rebelling against him and then had to escape from there because it was, I guess, dangerous to stick up for yourself. So I think if anyone was dabbling in women's herbalism, it was Sonia. Ah, okay, another, this is also wearable. This is my indigo crown. And Melinda in the audience, remember when we did a parade on Governor's Island last year? Yes, I had this on my head. So it doubles as a, you know, you're in a parade and you need to put a, you need to represent the plants grown on Governor's Island. But the different pages have the different colloquial and scientific. I should qualify that there are coming to be more and more discussions about the Latin names for plants and how they can be culturally biased. So that's partly why I like also adding in the different common names that people use, because that tells us who's using the plant and how they relate to it culturally. By the way, I teach workshops at the Center for Book Arts, and I do teach these techniques. So that's another, just throwing it out there. Okay, books with flaps and flip ups. So not all of the books look like conventional books like this or this one. Here's another one. I have the physical book. I'm basically a textile artist at heart, an embroiderer. That was kind of like my first medium. So this does talk about different reproductive plants. And sometimes the information is on top, but often it's underneath. So you would have to come flip it. And I picture it being installed like wall hung, where people would come up and look at the undersides. In a funny way, it has like a children's pop-up feeling, even though the content is not really what I would give a child. Okay, these are close-ups. You folks are gonna come look at the book, but for anyone at home, I'll just go through these. The European or white water lily, Nymphaea alba, that is a repeating motif in my work, and it is in the Ashkenazi herbalism book, it's said to lower libido. So I've interpreted that to mean that it is like a plant contraceptive. And maybe you take it and you give it to your partner and they don't know that they're taking it. Just saying. Just in case. Yeah. This is another unconventional book that has little pockets, and it has plant prints with Artemisia absinthium, which is wormwood. I discovered that wormwood was growing at Wyckoff Farmhouse in Brooklyn. And they gave me a little cutting to take home, and I pounded it onto this book. This is a close-up of what's under if you flip up the legs. It's a downward moving bitter herb. So another herb that's going to move things, like increase flow, right? Said to draw down Menzies in this Ashkenazi herbalism book. And I think we can go to YouTube and just see how the pounding works. It's really that simple. You just put it with a hammer. That's a small jewelry mallet that I got from Michael's, but honestly, if you have a little hammer at home, even if you have a rock, like go to your backyard, get a rock, it's gonna work. Done it with kids a bit. I would watch kids with it because of the hammering part, but it's a very accessible process. This is a close-up of wormwood, the actual leaves. They're hard to, it's hard to embroider those little filigree shapes, I'm just gonna say. More wormwood that I didn't realize was growing on Governor's Island in front of Earth. It's part of Earth Matters. There are a few little farms nestled together. They are the compost farm. That's not all they do, but they have wormwood. and books that aren't books. So a few of the artworks that were precursors or made through this process include this piece, Body Sovereignty book. I actually removed embroidery from this fabric that my aunt sent me. It had all this like really bright colored satin stitch floral pattern that was like not me, and I took it out. But I like the lace, and you can see the remnant of the pattern that was there. And I wanted to convey that feeling of, we all have the memory of things that were there that are no longer, like abortion access. I never thought in my lifetime that would be taken away, to be honest. I think I was lucky to be born in a year when it was already instated as a right. So it feels like a huge loss and like a real statement about where our culture is. And this piece is a mourning piece. There's a mourning dove. It's a sad piece. This is also a mourning piece. It was one of the first pieces I made before I was thinking about the books. Those are actually two lovebirds. And I think I put them in there because abortion rights are not just about women. They're about all of us. They're about families, and they affect everybody. Because two people have to make a baby, right? Techniques and materials. We looked at the pounding. This is more sort of that technique. This is kitchen printing, I call it. So I made inks from indigo pigment that I distilled from Japanese indigo leaves, from hibiscus and pomegranate peel, and used, some of these are potato prints actually. I think they all are potato prints. So it was everything that was printed was either the stamp was a plant and then the ink was a plant. I think we looked at this book earlier. It was like one of my first garden journals, and I'm going to invite everyone to come up in a moment and take a look at these and handle them. That's more of that book. And then finally, sometimes just for fun, I'll make something like this little avocado book. But avocados have a lot of mythology and a lot of really important cultural history. It's a fruit filled with antioxidants and tannins. In ancient Mayan culture, avocados were food and mythology. The Mayans believed ancestors were born in fruit trees, including avocados. So that's kind of a beautiful idea, that when you're having an avocado, you're connecting with your ancestors. And then on the back, I wrote the Latin name, Persea americana. This is the article I was reading about the cultural histories. And this is an article about pomegranate peels. Someone was trying to promote it as like a major, they're trying to promote, when you make the juice, save the peels because they have so much benefit for health and other uses, including eczema, psoriasis, other inflammatory issues. And this is this book and this box. Wow, it's like, I think the ink might have faded, or I took a really good photo. And what's next for Stitchcraft? I am going to continue making these books. Because we don't have our rights back. So I can't stop. Are there any questions about anything? Does anyone want to come up, take a look at the books? I can also pass them around if people feel a little shy. Do you want to, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to use the mic? Okay. Yeah, it's more like the Zoom folks. I'll just repeat it.
The wedding dress, to use that as a background.
So,
That's
true story. My mom gave me her wedding dress at one point, and I did indigo dye it. I think she has a piece of it indigo dyed. But we weren't precious about that. This was not a family heirloom. There's a store called Chimera that has it's in Brooklyn. There are a couple of locations, and I was walking past one day and saw a bag of fabrics and thought, I just had this gut feeling that it fit this project. And in fact, it had been a wedding dress that was deconstructed. And I think the designer had already used the parts that she needed. So when you think about planning a family, often you think about partnering with someone to do that. And you think about some of the unequal distributions of power that can be in relationships or that traditionally might have been in relationships. And to me, that's part of this story too. Maybe not overtly, but I think it's always there for me as a thought or a question. Women's bodies are being legislated, but by who? Right? Who's making these choices? Sometimes women are on board with it, but not always. Sometimes men are making decisions for us. Any other questions?
Curious about your process.
Mhm.
But something was there, like conversation, which is what to think about something, but like how you ever what's that nitty gritty of like that part?
The plants are telling me what to do most of the time. I think most of it is just intuitive sense of what I think fits together formally and also what makes meaning in that specific book. This was extremely improvisatory. It's not specifically about reproductive health. It's more like a little plant journal of my relationship to Old Stone House and Governor's Island and the way I harvest and talk to the plants and observe the plants. And I wanted to distill it into an experience other people could have. But harvesting, one can harvest in a very deliberative way. I don't. I kind of leap from one thing to another. And I think some of the books show that. And then this was maybe more planned, but not. It became more planned. But there was also a lot of improvisation. So I think I lean more towards the improvisation than the planning. Yeah. Yes, I love it. I went to see a beautiful exhibit with woven artworks that were so like playful that I decided I bought a loom for to teach a workshop, and I kind of kept it at home a little longer than I was supposed to because I really wanted to just experiment a little bit. I was trying to weave pictorially. I didn't do a great job. And then I painted with ink after the weaving. It was like a reverse process. And this is applique on, it's stitched on, these green leaves. Those are indigo leaves. This is like the different stages of the indigo plant. Sort of, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, you could take a photo with my mask on.
I was just thinking about the spectrum between when you pull something up a book, when you pull something, a piece of where, because some things are recognizable as, you know, if it has pages, we could be like, oh, I missed that. Or if it has facts. Some things seem less bookish, and I'm not sure when it turns into a book.
I think when I call it a book,
Okay,
it's a book.
okay.
So part of the point of this project is to ask that question. Because the initial question I had was what happened to this knowledge that had been conveyed intergenerationally amongst women for centuries? How did we lose it? So in 2020, whatever, right? 2024, 2025, how do we communicate information? We communicate it on TikTok and Instagram, right? But if we're going to do something tactile, I think I can get experimental with it. Because what one person is going to access is going to be different from how another person will access it. No, that was perfect because we are at the Center for Book Arts.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of questions, we love those questions.
But it's on the.
Are you working on something for the future? These are finished.
No, they're not. I mean, the grant period will end at the end of the year. So I can call that finished if I want, but I don't think this ends ever until things really change. Even if we get abortion rights back, they will be under threat. Like, it's not going to be an easy road. It's not going to be like, oh, we're done, move on. I don't think this issue is going anywhere. I think this is fundamental to various belief systems that are predominant enough that we will always have a struggle in this country. And in other countries too, we're not alone. Was there a question?
Yeah, this is not too annoying, but various misogynistic state legislatures, no other way to characterize it, misogynistic and showing a remarkable propensity to try to deny prescribed medication, abortion. I wonder if there's any thinking on the legality of herbal preparation.
I think someone asked that, or you might have asked that earlier. From what herbalists have told me in general about herbalism is that it's hard to regulate herbs, which is partly why there aren't FDA acknowledgements or ratings, safety ratings on them. So right now, it's sort of like take at your own risk. And plants are very powerful. The line between efficacy and toxicity can be small. So no one should be, I probably should have said this disclaimer already, but I'm not advising anyone to try any herbs at home. If you're interested, do some research, ask an herbalist, someone you think is really qualified and knows before you decide to ingest anything or try anything. Don't just read about it online and decide to try it by yourself. Will it become regulated? I think it only becomes regulated when there's a way to make money on it, right? Isn't that why drugs are regulated? Right, it becomes competitive with something else. Yeah, so it has to enter into that conversation. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's still sort of underground. And maybe that's a good thing, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it.
Also true that it's so novel and so nuanced that there aren't enough people who are aware of it to practice it, because if it did, if it was not somehow regulated, I mean, you could have some significant magic. If people are not doing it properly, and then it would raise awareness.
Well, that was one of the questions that came up right after the Dobbs decision. Are people going to get desperate, go online, find information, try it, but not have the full story? Because I think herbalism always was a little shrouded and information was a little hidden and protected. So as a result, there might be partial formulas or partial information that's available, and it is harder to find like really thorough information. I'm going to go back to this article. Here, this one here. Also, if you have to spend 20 days on an abortion regimen, ingesting herbs at very specific times of day, most of us are working adults, right? How are you going to do that when you're working? You're going to take a break every however often to brew some tea, and like then if you're cramping, you're going to be in a fetal position. Like who can do this 9 to 20 days? That was a question I had, like, is this practical? There's some privilege involved with being able to have that time to follow some of these.
But to the point again, is if it's not done properly, it's very,
Extremely dangerous.
These particular herbs, pretty acceptable.
Some of them are less accessible. And you can't just do it with parsley. It's not like you can just do parsley and ginger. There needs to be a few other things, but I take your point. That was a question I had as well in doing this research. I think what I realized was that it's less of a danger only because it is hard to find the information. You have to dig into it. It took me like 6 months to get just to this article. So one has to be pretty persistent. You have to really want to find the information. And a lot of herbalists from what I've read, they use the term amenagog. They don't use abortifacient because people don't know that amenagog means inducing menstruation. And inducing menstruation isn't enough. You still need the cervical softener, progesterone blocker, and there's one other. I'll find it. It's somewhere in here, but yeah.
Maybe if I step back, in terms of the objective and speaking about the overoption, is your intention to get the word out there that this is an avenue that should be further explored? Or what is the goal, to put it simply?
It started out as a question rather than a goal. The question was, women have always been able to space births and take care of their reproductive health. How did they do that? How did we lose the information? And what is more valuable, regaining the information or regaining the type of oral information networks that allowed that information to be conveyed? And I was straddling those two. And as I dug into information about planned abortions, I don't think it seems very practical for most of us, given where our modern lives are and how this one article describes what's required to do them. So it isn't about let's revive this method. It's let's have a conversation about this and keep it in the front of our minds and not forget it when a sexier, trendier topic comes up, because this problem is remaining, that there is increased maternal and infant mortality because of lack of access to adequate reproductive health care. Because doctors are afraid in some states to interpret a law and get into legal trouble and lose their ability to practice or be criminalized. Those things should not be happening. So saying that to someone is okay, yeah, we get it. Creating something that asks questions is my way of having that conversation. It's not solving a problem, it's asking more questions. Is there... So I thank you for mentioning that. I think what got a little buried in this is that I was actively hosting embroidery circles for about a year and a half, 2 years to get at that community aspect. And all of this in my mind was a form of community care. It was a way of saying, how do we support each other, even if it's just being in a space where we can feel sad in a space. Sometimes that's all that helps. That's like a step that just opens a door. It doesn't solve a problem, but it opens a door. And it's encouragement because it's validating. It lets you know, oh, I'm not the only person who is scared, terrified, sad, angry, and I don't have a place to put these feelings, and I can write my legislators and they don't care, you know. So what do? You find community. And the books are my community too, because these are my plants. Like for me, these are living in a way. The plants, the colors these were when I made them, they're not still the same color. That's just the nature of plant dyes. So these are living objects to me. They're evolving.
Are you primarily only interested in your Asia?
No, not at all.
I mean, I think ancient China, there's a lot of birds.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, if you go to Chinatown, you can go to those herbalists, have a lot of plants, specialists there. You know, I mean, have you thought about broadening that research for your topic?
Well, my process was broader than Eurasian herbs. I consulted several herbalists, neither of whom are in this tradition at all. Karen Rose, and I talked about this book. Karen Rose looks at, Afro-Caribbean and Latin American, right? And I'm sharing that this book also, and some of the herbalists I consulted are also coming from Latin American, African American, and Caribbean traditions. And some of the articles are talking about Chinese medicine, so that is in there as well. It is broad. There's no way to just narrow it into one tradition. So I did, of course, talk about this because it's important to me, but it was a much broader study.
So.
Mhm.
If you study for how herbs have been used to affect change in society, instead of to conventional
Right.
drugs.
There are certainly herbs that are known to shift moods. I wasn't focused on that, so I don't, right, I'm not able to share a lot of information about that, but it most definitely comes up in herbalism literature, and it could be a separate study. I do think it's related. I mean, mental and physical health are related, right? So the fact that we separate them is maybe an arbitrary choice. I just don't personally have a lot of knowledge about it because I wasn't really focusing on it. Yes, I can pass around the books. I'm gonna shut this. If people want to come up and look at them, we can also do that. This one I'm not gonna pass. Some of them I'm gonna leave here. I think I'll hand around some of the smaller ones that are easier to navigate. Kind of spread them out. If there's anything else that I think is easy to handle. This is a little easier to navigate on a surface, so I'll leave it here. Does anybody want to look at the books? I think this will answer more of that question of references. As I mentioned, this project isn't finished, so I had to make some choices just in terms of my capacity to absorb information in my time about what sources I would use. And I was looking at people who were local, who I could consult and already had a relationship with or a knowledge of their work. So for sure, it's not exhaustive, but it is a beginning. This one, I think some of us saw already, but not everyone. Oh, it's interfacing, a heavyweight, double-sided fusible interfacing.
Oh,
I am still hanging out there. I mean, we're getting towards the end of the season. It's up to mid-October, late October. But yeah, we're talking about next year. I don't know what I'm gonna grow. I don't have a plan yet. Please, I mean, if people want to come up, like, please do it. Come up, take a look at things, touch things. I'm just gonna switch that over a little. Maybe I'll just move this and then we'll have more.
It's so pretty.
Of course, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's your male and female cardinal. What plant is that supposed
Oh, well, I saw them feeding each other in Prospect Park. And remember I texted you about that? My brother is a birder. So anytime I have a bird sighting, I have to Let him know.
Yeah, the texture in your.
Are you gonna make more readings?
I don't know. I just, thank you. I just kind of felt like, I'm not sure. It doesn't have the precision of the embroidery.
Yeah.
So I don't, I'm like,
But
it's
that's
not,
kind
yeah,
about
I
it,
know.
yeah. Well, if it doesn't
I have
work,
mixed
you
feeling, I don't know
can
yet.
come
I'm like
back
kind
to
of
it
like,
if you want, and if not,
yeah,
yeah, don't
I have
force it.
mixed feelings about it. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. Great, I love it.
Definitely a different experience when you hold the.
Yeah, it feels different.
From afar. Like you're like, oh, this is what it is, but then when you, it's so intimate, like when you're like.
That's another part of making books and why I think they're so special, and it's sad that we like we're on our Kindle or a device and not holding a book. It's different to touch something.
It's really.
I know, I mean, it's not the size of an avocado, like, it's not accurate.
Also the texture, you know, like you.
It feels like a protective charm.
In your practice, do you ever remake, I guess this,
Sure.
do you ever remake something, like
Like
do you
a
like consider one a
verbatim?
draft or and improve it? Or
I mean, that was my draft in a way, just in terms of the form and how I was going to combine, make a book out of materials that I was used to use in non-book forms.
Would you consider making like multiples, like an accessible version that would be like.
I've made,
distributed?
yes, I
Front,
made
center.
zines that were based on this, which I think we had at the center at one point, but I guess we don't have them at this time.
Did you do any research about, abortions that were beyond
The 6 weeks.
So early.
Right, well, it's the same argument that's happening with abort restrictive laws, that you're not gonna know necessarily. At 6 weeks. Oh, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody online. Thank you for coming to the talk. Please come to our party next Wednesday. Bye-bye.